Hello everyone, I am your host Shayanta and welcome to the show. The RBI has in its recent circular called for international trade settlement in the Indian rupees, where they have laid down the framework where foreign countries can trade with India using the INR instead of the coveted US dollars. Now, this is an interesting proposition as just after the Russia Ukraine war, the West has imposed a lot of sanctions on Russia, including blocking almost all of Russian banks out of the SWIFT network, that is making trade with Russia very difficult. For our audience, what exactly is SWIFT network? In a very layman's language, a SWIFT network is a complex network of banks through which different countries trade. So that is mostly controlled by the US and the Western countries mostly. So that is what the SWIFT network is. So blocking a country out of the SWIFT network is basically cutting yourself from the world trade in today's term. Now, amidst all this geopolitical tension that is going on, can this move by the RBI open up an alternative for India Russia trade? What are its benefits and downsides, and how will this affect the Indian economy? To answer these questions, we have a very special guest with us. Let me introduce our guest today. Our guest today is Professor Arindam Banik. He is the ACC Chair Professor in International Finance and Business of International Management Institute in New Delhi. And he has worked as a consultant for various governments and multilateral agencies, including World Bank, FICCI New Delhi, and of course, our very own Government of India in the Ministry of Rural Development. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Shayanta. The problem you have raised that if someone is not trading in dollars, what are the alternates? Now, if you see the historical background, if you see the evolution of 1940 Bretton Woods system, when countries decided that it is not possible to trade in UK pounds, simply the pound lost competitiveness, simply defined by export-import wise. UK pound or UK as a source and destination was not a competitive country. But if you see China now, that we call China as a world-class manufacturing nation. In 1942, US had similar role played across the globe. That simply explained that dollar was dominant because most of the countries earlier used to take trade means surplus means gold reserve as a proxy of prosperity of the country. That means that country perhaps an export surplus nations. Defined by USA, defined by Germany, defined by France, they're all rising force in those days. But export-import was as a percentage of GDP in those days, USA was dominating. So it was at that time decided that since USA is a powerful export-import or open economy, so trade or transactions should be with the help of US dollar, not UK. So you departed UK and shifted to US dollar. Now, at that time, the country who are prosperous in terms of export surplus, they had the gold. Rule says that 1 ounce of gold will be equivalent to $34. So, for example, Germany having a trade surplus nations, huge gold with them. So they can surrender gold if they want US dollar to trade with other nations. Perhaps USA will be ready to supply dollars because of that on receipt of the gold from concerned countries. In this case, Germany is one of the examples we have cited. Then we call this is a kind of pegged exchange rate regimes defined by USA dominant in trade relationships. But if you see, let's call a famous Bretton Woods system. Bretton Woods is a place located very close to New Hampshire, and the powerful country in those days decided that this is the new way of understanding the world economy, and they streamlined also, defined by forming International Monetary Fund, forming World Bank, and forming other sister organizations. IMF was formed simply if a country is facing balance of payment crisis defined by uh, imports are high, exports are less, so you need dollar to defend your exchange rate. If you do not have money, then if IMF is actually able to convince that yes, this country has a genuine problem, then they provide dollar loan to the concerned country, maximum period defined by 4 to 5 years. That's the idea of Bretton Woods systems. This has, I must say, this has streamlined the systems. Most of the countries were benefited, but more interestingly, in those days, most of the countries defined by emerging economies, defined by some less developed economies, were actually all closed economies. So, pegged exchange rate regime at the latest is fixed exchange regime means that you should have sufficient reserve defined by gold or dollar to defend your exchange rate. That was the idea. But slowly, if you people say, or experts argue that a rise of East Asian countries where USA had strategic relationship with Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Brunei, Malaysia, they have kind of strategic Hong Kong relationships. So entry of these countries in US destination was more or less certain, one, and they are following a new exchange regime which is known as currency board mechanism. That simply explains this country will follow the benchmark, and they should have enough dollar or foreign exchange to defend their exchange rate. To defend, for example, if you argue that Indonesian rupiah, for example, one US dollar is 20 rupiah, that implies that Indonesia should have enough foreign exchange to defend rupiah. Now, if you do not have enough reserve, US actually helping them to defend their exchange rate, which is nothing but as a proxy. Currency board, there are fundamental differences between fixed exchange rate and currency board mechanism. But on the whole analysis, in the fixed exchange regime, one can approach IMF. If you have a genuine problem, you get and defend your exchange rate. Currency board is actually your partnering nations actually helping you to defend the exchange rate. And Singapore is also part of the story in those days as defined by. So most of the economies were actually streamlined. And yes, US played a crucial role to give these countries manufacturing product to enter into US economy. As a result, these Asian nations became very powerful in terms of trade relationships, trade surplus, and then to defend their exchange rate. But then suddenly we have some the issues really in 1996 East Asian crisis. I am not going back so much details on that. I'm just focusing the point of what Shayanta has raised. Now, when these countries became powerful, then USA is actually more or less lost competitiveness. Means what? They didn't have enough surplus so far gold is concerned. Then what they were actually doing on receipt of the dollar decrease for Germany or France or Japan, they are printing dollar and supplying to those nations. Suddenly, some of the countries, for example, USA, then US, Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, Japan. They found that we can't see any export surplus over the US economy is concerned. But how come USA is actually supplying dollars? They should have gold reserve. Then it was found actually, they try to find out what is actually the actual rate of the dollar. If you take 1970 as 100, the index, dollar index, they found out that index of dollar has significantly declined from 1967 to 1971. That simply explains there may be, theory-wise, excess supply of dollar than the demand for the dollar.
Yes.
Created in the market. Now, because of that reason, some of the countries took unilateral decisions. Germany, Switzerland, Japan. They said we do not trust these fixed exchange or pegged exchange regimes. We should have our unilateral exchange rate policy. So then you have the start of clean float mechanism, flexible rate, managed float mechanisms came into picture. Means each country can decide what should be the fate of the dollar. Now, so where current situation is concerned, you must have seen that dollar has as a reserved currency defined. When countries have foreign exchange surplus, they strategically invest in diversified currencies. Definitely, US dollar was powerful. Most of the countries, for India, for example, Japan, for example, there's a concept of reserve currency. So US dollar is still considered the reserve currency. And in those days, investment made by the concerned countries, so for export surpluses are concerned, they are basically trading in dollars. So investing in dollars, it was 70-80%. Interesting, in recent time, we found, in general, on an average, investment made by the concerned countries in dollars has significantly declined to 59%. Investing in dollars. There are other currencies. Euro is about 20%. And more interestingly, just 5 years before, China had no place in terms of countries' investment pattern. That simply explained, at this stage is 2%. The concerned countries are investing in Chinese yuan. And experts argue that in next 5 years is going to be 5%. That simply explains what is the right price of the dollar, why countries are actually departing dollars. One thing is very certain. If you see India, China, Russia, and Brazil, export-import wise, these countries control about 24% of the total trade. Now, people argue if this country decide, as Shayanta has rightly mentioned, that decide not to trade in dollars. He has mentioned, SWIFT assumes that you are trading in dollars. If the country making some kind of bilateral arrangements, people say, in relative terms, India, why is feeling protected? Simply, India smartly dealt with Russia, defining trade not involving dollars, negotiated adjusted rupee-dollar trade, ruble trade. In the process, balance of trade between Russia and India, try to understand the export and import patterns. Russia is dominated in defense equipment in India. Is one of the powerful nations, so we need Russia. So, where consumer items are concerned, yes, we trade with Russia. But agriculture, but soybean oil, then edible oil, sunflowers, all we are actually very much depends on Russia. So in the process, If India decide to deal with Russia with their accepted rupee trade, you are avoiding dollar. So you are not, suppose dollar the trade volume India per annum in an accounting year may be defined by say $100 billion, for example, and they are not trading in dollar, not involving dollars. That simply explain from India and Russian side, you are not demanding dollars, so the supply side of dollar will be more than, because India is not trading or demanding dollars. So rationally, the the real price of the dollar will genuinely fall. The kind of situation what we have seen in the context of America, when equity investors decided to leave India because Federal Bank decided to raise the interest rate of their federal bond. This is not the right time to go for this kind of situation, but they found that if they're having inflation, why inflation? One, when they gave say the select group of population of their population $600 per person for 6 or 8 months without any consequences of the dollar income, real dollar income. That simply explains you just printed dollars and gave it to the people. Now, that's dollar, perhaps. Now, there's a famous argument by one of the famous US economists that if US government decided to print dollar and giving it to the people on free cost basis, do you think that in American economy will be revived? A smart student will argue cannot. Why? Because of the 600, for example, you have given, $400 is going back to China because they are manufacturing. And US is very much depends on manufacturing. They cannot produce on their own because costs are very high. So only 200 may be remaining there in the services. So in the process, you have supplies excess dollar in the process, and USA still now having today, I am going through the newspaper about 8.5% inflation rate.
Yes,
traditional theory said if you have inflation, take extra dollar from the market. How to do that? Raise the interest rate of the federal bond. Now, in the process, you must have seen most of the emerging economies, small economies are deeply affected. Sri Lanka, for example, Bangladesh, for example, many African nations, for example, people thought, Pakistan, for example, people thought India will have problem. But as I said earlier, India has smartly moved it. Not involving dollars, do trade with ruble so that you are not demanding dollars. So you will not be in trouble. So foreign investors, despite the fact data says about 20 or 21 billion so far left, investors have left India. And that explains why our currency is 75 to 80 rupees, partly. But again, we found out that we are very cautious. We are quite successful, actually, to managing this kind of crisis.
Apart from Russia, there are other countries also who has shown such bilateral arrangement interest with India. For example, Iran, Venezuela, UAE. So, can this move also help such bilateral arrangement, or how do you see the relation with India with other countries in this context with this circular coming in?
Yeah, good question. But you see, in this current world, you are very much concerned about your country.
Yes.
Despite the fact USA has given the pressure that don't do that, but then USA will never assure you that if you have problem, they never help Pakistan. They never, in this current situation, Sri Lanka, they never help even Bangladesh. But then these other countries may not have the courage to do trade with Russia because USA has a big market So their garments products are concerned.
Yes, yes. There's also
And
fear of sanctions and stuff
fear of sanctions.
of
But
the US.
India smartly convinced US administration, perhaps, I'm sure. And
Yes.
but then with the lower cost got the crude price, which was significantly less than the world market. And hugely, if you see the growth of the import of crude from Russia during this time of war is quite high. So for our private companies and government oil marketing companies are concerned, imported oil from Russia. So that way, I must say that we have somehow managed the crisis. So for foreign exchange management, our currency exchange rates are concerned. We had fear, perhaps it will, perhaps is a psychological benchmark. $1 is 80. If it is above 80, we have a kind of problem. So far, RBI somehow managed it. That defined our strong, what is called strong reserve. Actually helped us. Maybe 20-25 billion dollars are out of the country because of federal interest rates high. But some of the investors, they have some kind of trust over Indian economy is concerned. Some might have left, but then, but and if you see, if you have 570 or $80 billion reserve, maybe 20 or 21% of them are basically defined by foreign institutional investors. Of them, about 20, 25, or $30 billion are out of the country. That has impacted our exchanges, I agree. But then it is also a certain, if you see the relative behavior of exchange rate fall, India's exchange rate last 2 months maybe defined by 8 to 9%. But there are countries, their exchange rate, the depreciation rate, sometimes 20%, 21%, or something like that. So in that respect, India is somehow managed, but then credit goes to Indian government smart policy. Although
And
it is not clear about how USA is actually perceiving us, in my opinion, perhaps somehow we have diplomatically managed it. So for
and
our interest.
yes, so on that context of this RBI's, thanks for explaining, by the way, the whole history of the things of why US dollars is the dominant part and what is the whole history behind this. One more thing I wanted to ask just, okay, RBI wants to trade in rupee bilateral arrangements they want to do, but with the SWIFT network out of the system, of course, what exactly India is planning with the other countries? Like, for example, we have the Vostro accounts, which having the Swift counterpart of the Indian version and the Russian version, right? The Vostro account. So, is India planning to use those in this context? Can the Vostro account be used for other trades, like for example, India, Venezuela, or it is only between India and Russia?
At this stage, Indian RBI is actually monitoring in the Nostro account or Vostro account, say how much is the reserve. So, for example, with Russia, Germany, or other countries, if the reserve is not strong enough, then perhaps if the concerned country is actually somehow depending on our exports, then perhaps this is a kind of solutions, even bilateral trade arrangements. But in general, I think I'm going through somewhere. The Asian countries, if they are trading on their own, not involving dollars in general, in the long run, long run defined by 5, 6, 7 years, in my opinion, it's going to happen. It would be a serious problem over fate of the dollar is concerned. I think people are arguing now. I've seen some of the articles in English newspapers. They are talking about second Bretton Woods systems. In 1952, we lost UK lost competitiveness. So we accepted dollars, but then now we found out that USA is no longer a competitive nation in exports. on agriculture, defense equipments, some oil or something like that are US still competitive.
Yes.
But other countries not. And this country is actually having deficit with most of the countries, the current account deficits. I have a feeling just using the international agencies to remain competitive and dollar is a standard transaction medium may not survive in the long run. It's it's not possible. So that simply explains second Bretton Woods. Do we sit together again and justify what kind of currency you want? People say Chinese yuan maybe one of the solution, but then there are political issues.
Of
Um,
course.
and these political issues are important, and 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 India China is a very very sensitive issue. Business wise, it is not. You must have seen yesterday we have just
Yes.
opened a flight, and a lot of Indian businessmen now going to Guangzhou and other provinces because they want to trade components and other things. Um,
India and China always
how
have had a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, it's a love-hate relationship. But then, if these countries are united somehow, it's not possible. There are a lot of
Yes.
border issues and all that. I have a feeling it is very difficult to manage dollar as a proxy of transactional mechanism as a currency. We'll have serious questions to maintain that stuff.
So, I hope this bilateral arrangement will benefit the Indian economy, right? If at all it goes into place, and we see in the coming years that more and more such trade relationships are developed. But all this seems too good to be true, because we are already having around 119 billion US dollars trade right now. Do you think, of course, do you think that the Western countries, especially the US, will be happy with this arrangement? What can be the geopolitical repercussions, and how do you see India handling that? I mean, you already said that India has very smartly moved. So, how far can we stretch ourselves in this particular scenario, and what are the precautions that you believe we can have with respect to such bilateral arrangements?
Well, it's a political, a very interesting question. It's a political economy. Um, as you have rightly mentioned, we have love-hate relationship. Uh, Despite the fact uh, uh, Rabindranath was the pioneer to establish our excellent relationship. He was the key person. If you see is the letter from China, a lot of insights he was sharing. I personally, I travel a lot in Chinese villages and all that.
Okay.
In one of the villages I visited about say 5 6 years before, and I was residing in a village, and then they said you early morning you have to go to school. So I visited a primary school there, and they are actually reciting a Chinese translated version of Tagore's poem. But I
No.
was not aware, and I said, well, in Christian missionary school, you pray, in Hindu school or Muslim school, you pray to the God for the welfare of the children and other things. But here is something different. Then I said, can you translate it? What is the actual flavor of the poem they're reciting? This you must have heard a poem they call Tiger, not Tagore. Thygore. It's
Okay.
Tiger's poem. What is Tiger? Which one? Then there's some where mindless fear and all that. Chitto jatha bhai
I had
shunyo.
to know
Yeah.
Ustajata Shir.
Uh-huh. Then is that yes? Then he said yes because we have high respect for Tagore, and an old lady, Indians who came to China, we considered them very honest. They gave example of tiger. They gave example of Buddha. They said they're very honest. And we learn a lot of things from India. Our culture and everything is transformed thanks to India and Indian civilizations or something. This we have high respect. I am talking about the message from a village, how people perceive it. Strategically, it's unfortunate that we are not, we are
Long
have
ways.
some border issues, 1962 wars, then recently Galowans, all kinds of issue. Um, I do not understand why it cannot be resolved. People say partly blame major powers. They want that India China should not maintain a good relationship. Well, I do
True,
not know.
true.
It's my question. But at the end of the day, the way I see now that USA cannot desert India for his or her interest. Why? India is a strong force militarily in Asia. If they want to some kind of block defined
Pressurize
by
China.
Australia, Japan, Singapore, India. Singapore said we are not part of the story because we are independently behaving. Then USA found partners defined by India, defined by Japan, defined by Australia, who can really challenge China. Um, I do not know uh, whether this idea of elusive strategic interest will in the long run will be served by these three countries. I am not sure because business interest. Japan has huge business interest in China. Similarly, China has huge business interest in India. So rest is Australia. If Australia's product, behavior, minerals, that's the major source of foreign exchange earning, where to sell is only either China or India. So, but export and import relations are concerned, USA can never fulfill their dream uh, because of the interest, business interest, bilateral business interest. And Japan is a source of capital, the cheap capital. Uh, uh, Japanese how long keep on investing in US equity market because in manufacturing wise they cannot do in invest it in USA. So the option is basically either China, India. Uh, whether these countries will be interested to go for some kind of normal relationship with the three major countries defined by Japan, India, and Japan and China, or some outside forces will be dictating us to the business. I am not sure. It's not my version. It's also US policymakers also thinking about it that it cannot sustain. Business interest is the driving force, and you must also accept the reality. Manufacturing wise, we are not competitive.
Exactly.
Our
We are mostly
equipment,
service-based economy.
uh,
Yes.
uh, equipment, component, OEMs we are very much depending on. Despite the fact we thought we should be Atmanirbhar Bharat, but then it didn't work for us. As you know, many China's equipments are coming from Brazil. So Chinese equipment coming from other Middle Eastern countries and then coming back to India, which is costing you more. The manufacturing costs are rising,
Yes.
prices will be rising. So it remains to be seen how our business interest will be served in the long run.
And before we conclude, sir, one last question. Like this strategy coming, the circular coming in, how do you see this thing going ahead? Like, what is RBI's future strategies can be with respect to this kind of arrangement? What exactly RBI is looking at in the long run? Say, for example, next 5 years or 7 years. What would you perceive
Uh,
to play this thing
uh,
out?
you have initially have given us some hints. Ukraine war, for example, is a
Yes.
lesson for every country. A power, USA, for example, has decided you generally boycott Russia. But naturally, it is not possible. Each of the countries has their own, will also calculate their own cost and benefits. And RBI, I'm sure the smart movers, RBI have seen that aspect, export import wise, who is actually dominating. At this stage, that you are right, short term policy, RBI thought that let's go by bilateral arrangements, export wise, import wise. If you export more from India, Indian currency will be benefited. If you export less from India, then your currency will be. That's the arrangement we are doing now in the short run arrangement. But in the long run, I have a feeling India will only be a successful manufacturing nation. We want a successful manufacturing nation because it's not possible to take all the laborers who are basically unemployed now in the service sector. It's difficult. We have and we do not have that kind of preconditions to remain the world power in manufacturing. You are China actually functioning in this particular period. That simply explains we should learn how to use components, how to use the import duties as a tool. If you're going by the Pai Panandi, not Pai Panandi, this famous Indian economist, I think today he has written an excellent article, the tariff rates, and then in recent time, India's tariff rate is quite high. Now
Yes.
he's asked tariff rate to be taken as a revenue. Arvind Panagaria, in today's times, he is talking about that tariff rate is high. What is the purpose? You want to protect your own industry, one, or you want to generate revenue. Why tariff will be used for generate revenue? It should not be. You see your the high tariff rate. It has increased significantly. It has if it has increased significantly. That simply explain you will be unable. Your company or your farms will be unable to compete with the rest of the world. You may be comfortable in the domestic economy, but you should know also how to compete with others.
Yes.
Increase in tariff rate means you are giving a high protection to your own industry. The way we see 1947 to 1991 is high tariff rate regimes. So policies should also support RBI policy, right? That slowly reduction of the tariff is the only way. If our manufacturing laborers are not competitive, they are not employable, strategize the policy. Perhaps in the long run, we will be benefited. But instead of doing it, if you are following the same traditional way of protecting your own industry, perhaps globally you cannot be competitive. That's my. And then in the process, RBI will have serious problem then, right? To
Yes.
manage currency and all other things.
And to add to that, recently, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, the government has come up with the banning the Chinese phones below 12,000 rupees. So that is seen also as a move like that to protect the, I mean, Indian low cost Indian mobile phone manufacturers. But let's see how it plays out.
Uh, government now are going. We are very selective. Some of the things we need components is handset. We import from them. Some of the things we will not import because our industry is enough. But then you cannot do this. You cannot.
Yes,
You
exactly.
should have a conscious policy so that say Chinese investor coming to India, if Indian market is highly sensitive for them, investing in India and producing the same for export purposes. There are many sunset Chinese firms. Sunset means they are not competitive globally because of their high cost.
Okay.
And many sunset farms are now shifting their production base in other countries. Why we are not actually exploiting that one? leave aside your political relationships, but then uh, you need China in this crucial decision making
Hmm.
process. Otherwise, see, look, this is the first time you must have seen electronic and electronics related product prices are significantly on rising trend, because perhaps in TV or air conditioner, the components you are not importing, or import costs are high, you have put duties and all kinds of things. In the process, costs are rising. But globally, they are not. So that is important part to support RBI's policy. RBI should also, we help them to defend their exchange rate and defend their own policies. If the allied policies are not supporting RBI, then it cannot say RBI is actually not taking action. There are other supporting elements as well. I'm sure if you see Chinese, our investment patterns, so for foreign exchange reserves are concerned, um, we have definitely raised or increased the investment in yuan also now, diversify our portfolios. Definitely, we have done it because uh, uh, perhaps we may need this currency to trade with China, the yuan and rupee relationship.
Yes,
So
of
that
course.
will be the only way to diversify your things in the long run. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I think that will be the end of it. I mean, thanks for your insights. And from the history to the current scenario, we have really have now a comprehensive idea about why RBI is doing such things and what are the repercussions and the future that can we can see. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.